Good evening. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Rail Committee of the City Council of Palo Alto for Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames.
Here.
Chair Burt.
Here.
Mayor Lowing.
Here.
For the record, we have quorum, all members present.
Thank you. All right. So our agenda this evening, before we get into verbal updates and then two action items, which are discussion of the outreach and engagement plan for the corridor crossings, followed by a study session on the bike connectivity. We have an opportunity for members of the public to speak on any item that is not on the agenda, but is within the purview of the committee. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
Yes, through the chair, we have two members here in person that would like to speak to general public comment.
Okay.
Our
great.
first speaker is Myra A., and I'm going to invite Myra A. to come up here when she is ready. And if she can just give me one moment to cue up the timer. You can push the button.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Mayra Zanza. I am a mother of a junior at Pali and soon graduating from a secondary Spanish immersion son. And I am part of a group of concerned parents who are deeply invested in the safety of our children as they cross the train tracks in Palo Alto, especially at the Churchill Avenue crossing. Today, I want to highlight the urgent need to improve the island space at that intersection. Our Pali students who walk or roll to school every day are forced to crowd together on their bikes, dangerously close to traffic. Right now, the landing space is simply too small. We know there is a plan to make this area safer. We have spoken to some of you, and we know that's happening. We really appreciate that. But let's take advantage of the summer break and make this happen sooner rather than later. Our students' safety must come first. There is also an important thing that I would like to highlight is that cars keep parking against the law on the two parking spots on the right-hand side heading north on Churchill. We have reported that problem to the city, but would like to the law to be reinforced, also improve the signage with possibly bigger signs or clear from branches, and to add marking to the pavement if that's possible. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Vandana A.
Hi, my name is Vandana, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak here. I have 3 kids at PAUSD. My kids go to Pali. My older one just graduated last year, and my younger ones are sophomores. They used to bike when they were in 9th grade. But every time they used to take the intersection on Churchill Alma, it used to scare me. So last 2.5, 3 years, I've been driving them every day. I have stopped taking that intersection because it is really risky. And I just want to say that crossing is really horrific. I often see many bikers near the tracks waiting for the train to pass. There is no island for bikers to wait, and they are usually spilling over on the street. High-speed traffic on Alma makes it all the more dangerous for these bikers to wait there. I would like to request a longer green light signal time for straight-going traffic, basically on Churchill, which is usually bikers and pedestrians during the peak hours, as well as a countdown timer for all the signals. This will certainly help the pedestrians and the bikers to know the amount of time left before signal changes and make informed choice whether to cross the road or not. I hope you consider making these changes, and thank you so much.
Our next speaker is John M.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Hello, members. Thank you so much for your hard work on behalf of our city. We saw you again late at night last night at the council. I appreciate how hard you're all working for us. I had a meeting Monday with Councilmember Burt, and I was reassured that the city is looking forward to implementing quiet zones as soon as possible. And that made me feel very good. I wanted to thank everybody for that. And we just wanted to also reiterate that our concerns are based on health and safety issues around excessive noise pollution 20 hours a day. And that's part of what's made us motivated to come and try and work with our council members and our rail committee members. And we're grateful for them hearing us. Thank you.
Through the chair, that concludes public comment.
Thank you. So our next items are updates on interagency activities, starting with Caltrain, then VTA and city staff. And Ripon?
We do have Caltrain staff from Navi online,
Oh,
so
great.
thank you.
Okay. Welcome, Navi.
Hello, everyone. Apologies for not being able to attend in person, but I'm glad that I can be here virtually to provide an update to the Rail Committee members and members of the community. So just to dig in, I'll keep this short and sweet. Caltrain has completed the installation of the 9.5-foot fencing along the west side of the tracks from Churchill Avenue to the Palo Alto station. This new fencing replaces the existing shorter fence adjacent to the Palo Alto bike path and is a part of our ongoing efforts to enhance safety along the corridor. Caltrain's operating contractor, Tazi, is working with the fencing contractor to address just a few minor punch list items, and once those are resolved, we will be able to formally close out the project. We also wanted to share that the rail sentry system that was recently installed at Broadway Burlingame intersection has also been installed at Churchill recently. We've been gaining some data, and I wanted to just share a high level overview of what data we were able to collect just from Broadway Burlingame. And so since this installation, we've seen 0 incursions as opposed to the roughly average of like 3 incursions at that crossing. And so I believe this is an optimistic data point that we are excited to share with members of the community as the package of near-term safety improvements that we can bring to the corridor as we continue to plan for these long-term grade separation projects. What I'm hoping to do is return to the rail committee in the near future to provide an update on the rail sentry system as it relates to what we know about how it works at Churchill Avenue specifically. And I'm hoping our Chief Safety Officer, Mike Meter, will join me. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it back to Ripon unless there's any questions or additional points of clarification that I can provide to the committee members or members of the public.
Yeah, Mayor Lowing has a question, and I have one.
Yes.
So this question doesn't mean that I think the cup is half full, but what is left to do in terms of the fencing on the tracks?
In terms of the
Well, you said you did the west side, I think you said, of the tracks between Churchill and the train station.
Correct. We did
Okay.
we replaced there was an existing fence there that was a little shorter. And so we replaced that with the 9.5-foot fencing.
And is there more to do is really my question. If so, where's that?
So I believe there are some places that we can still install this 9.5-foot fencing. And so what we've always talked about, Mayor Lowing, is this is the phase 1 implementation. Because we had the funding available, we were able to install in a area that will, working with the city and members of the community, seem to be the most need today. But that's not to say there isn't a future phase 2. So right now, I think our biggest focus from the Caltrain side of the house on the advocacy front is to make sure that we can obtain and look out for additional funding and grant opportunities so that we can continue to fence not only areas in the Palo Alto corridor, but corridor wide.
Okay, thank you very much.
I could clarify a bit on that. I believe with the completion of this current project, the only remaining areas, well, let me take a step back from that. With completion of this project, we now have all the publicly exposed sides of the Caltrain corridor with a taller fence with winglets from really end to end within Palo Alto, with the exception of the right-of-way adjacent to residential backyard fences. So those remain the areas within Palo Alto, aside from the crossings and stations themselves, that do not have this taller fence. So we've actually accomplished quite a bit, and appreciate the cooperation and assistance by Caltrain in getting that installation done.
Yeah, Julie?
Thank you, Ed Chikata. I was going to go there to try to deepen my understanding of where these fences are and aren't. And so when you said we've actually done everything we can with the taller fences with winglets from end to end, with the exception of the right-of-way adjacent to residential backyard fences.
Correct.
Is that something, does that mean we can never do that? Is that a negotiation with property owners that own those fences? What?
I think it is a question as to funding, as well as to a certain extent just the practical dimensions of having one fence immediately next to another fence, and how that would be maintained, how that will be set up. That has not yet been resolved.
So I would just add that the question of putting the 6 foot with winglets, so a 9 foot fence, 7 foot with winglets?
9 foot.
Including the winglets, yeah. Alongside the private wooden fences is something that's been discussed, and it is actually a location. A backyard fence was location of a suicide a number of years ago. So it is an issue, even though there's fencing there. And Navi, you mentioned a punch list, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but there is actually a gap that's a very important gap. The overpass of the Bike and Ped overpass at Embarcadero, which is immediately adjacent to a Pali High School exit, is a very low fence. Then there's a low concrete wall, but it was always the lowest access point anywhere where we had fencing, and it did not receive the new fencing. And so I don't know if, because it doesn't have the ability to secure to the ground, if it was just determined that it wouldn't be there, or if that's part of the punch list.
So I can confirm that I don't believe that it's a part of the punch list, but what I can do is see if the agency and our operations team has any plans or justification as to why, if we aren't going to be putting fencing there, why, and if we are planning to, then what the potential timeline can look like for that.
Well, I'd ask you, I was already going to contact Mike Meter on this because yes, it is a more difficult fence to install, but I've actually long, and I'm not alone, viewed it as our highest risk location, not just a risk. And I just saw on Nextdoor a poster who raised the same issue, and a number of community members chiming in. So it's something that I think we need to look at right away. And it's harder to install there, but more important. So, okay. Thank you very much. And I guess that leads us to any VTA updates.
Chair, there's no staff from VTA providing the updates. So it will be city staff updates.
Okay. And now city staff.
All right. Ripon Bhatia, interim chief transportation official. With regards to so we have update on the quiet zone projects. We have made some progress. The project for the Palo Alto Avenue quiet zone has progressed to bid the project, and it has been transitioned to Public Works. We are procuring the contractor to perform the additional work that's required to implement the quiet zone, and we are planning to award that project as part of the overlay and other concrete improvements, routine concrete improvements, and it will be coming to the council in early June for the award. For the Churchill Meadow and Charleston crossings, we have conducted a public outreach meeting on April 16th. We received quite a good feedback from our community, and we are now planning on finalizing the concept plans as well as the report and bring back to the Rail Committee at our next Rail Committee meeting. With regards to Churchill and Alma Street Section 130 improvements, there's going to be a signal work that's going to be needed to be performed over the weekend. So looking at performing that work in the first weekend of June after the schools close, so there will be less impact to the school. And then the Caltrain and the city remaining work will be planned to be completed during the summer. So by the end of the summer, we should be able to have this project, majority of the work completed. For Charleston and Alma Street, staff has been working to procure the consultant for the design of the safety improvements that are required, and conduct the diagnostic meetings, planning to conduct diagnostic meetings in later this summer, early fall for the project. So that's for the Charleston Alma improvements. And that concludes my staff updates.
Julie?
Thank you, Ripon. For the sake of those of us who aren't as steeped in it as you are, could you just give us a few details when you say the Section 130 improvements on Churchill and Alma, was it? First week of June starts, completed by the end of the summer. Give us an overview of what those improvements will entail, as well as the Charleston and Alma design, the safety improvements that are going in there.
So the Charleston Alma and Churchill Avenue improvements include a signal improvements, advanced signal preemption, as well as improvements with the pedestrian crossing at the railroad tracks. And then also the improvements include signing and striping, includes I think widening of the ramps. So those are the major infrastructure improvements. I think there was a summary provided earlier to this committee also on this project work, but that's what I can recall from my.
Those are the ones already done?
No,
remaining?
That's a total part of the project, and I think there's a lot of concrete work that remains because the signal there was some poles that needs to be removed, and that requires nighttime work, and that's what the Caltrain and the city is coordinating to work over the June 6th weekend.
So a few of our public commenters mentioned a concern about Churchill and Alma, the notion of kids gathering and island needing to be improved or created, concerns about signaling and whatnot. Is there anything that we have in the works that might be relevant to those who express concerns tonight?
So I have noted those comments. One was extension of the green time. The other is about the countdown pedestrians, and I'll look into the plans to ensure or coordinate with the project engineer to ensure if those elements can be incorporated. Sometimes extension of the green times and other times may not be feasible, especially when the trains are coming, because you do have the advanced signal preemption that's needed to trigger the signal when the trains are approaching, and those timings are preset sometimes because of the distance from where the signal from the train has to come to the traffic signal. So we will look into it and see if whatever feasible for the signal timing improvements can be made, and we will look into it, and I'll bring it to our staff.
Thank you. And then a brief summary of the safety improvements going in at Charleston and Alma, please.
So those improvements have not yet been determined. The diagnostic meeting typically brings in that discussion, but it would be similar to what is done for Churchill Avenue. These improvements are discussed as part of the diagnostic meetings with the CPU, CFRA, and Caltrain staff. That meeting is being coordinated by our project engineers. So we are hoping, because of the level of effort that different agencies are involved, it takes a while to get this meeting set up, but we are hoping to get that one set up in later this summer, early fall.
Just one other follow-up. At the Churchill, we have, in addition to all the improvements at the intersection, we have the Churchill Avenue bike improvements that would go out to El Camino, and I think connected with that is east of Alma and Churchill, some redoing.
So as part of the Churchill Alma safety improvement project, there are some signing and striping improvements that would provide for the green bike lane markings or through the intersection and up to, I believe, Mariposa or Castilleja. And then our other project, which is Churchill Avenue and bike enhancement project, that one would extend the Class 1 bike path that's along Churchill Avenue that currently terminates, I believe, at Castilleja, will be extended all the way to Stanford Perimeter Trail.
Off-road.
Correct.
Class 1 being off-road.
Being off-road. And then the signing and striping of the existing infrastructure along in the Churchill Avenue as well.
So east of Alma, what I was wanting to ask about is when we have this massive number of bikes that queue up in the morning, and then when school lets out, it's a chaotic hazard. And there's really two problems. In the morning, westbound, and I'm not sure if that's what our speakers were talking about, is there isn't a bike box there, and they get dozens of bikes and pedestrians that get queued up for a single crossing. So I didn't know whether we have any plans as part of those improvements to perhaps reduce by one or maybe two parking spaces, the on-street parking that is permitted as you're queuing up on Churchill to head westbound across Alma. That's where a bike box could occur. And right now there isn't one, and there can be cars parked there that interfere with what otherwise would be natural bike queuing. And not to mention we have to make sure that we don't have, if we put a bike box there, we don't have cars trying to do a right turn in the bike box on red or whatever. But and so I don't know whether there is a design plan to improve that at that location, or that's not yet part of our plans.
What I recall from looking at the plans a while back, I believe the first parking space is there is some room in the first about 40 feet of behind the crosswalk for the bike and storage, I would say, queuing and storage, and that is going to be marked. But the bike box in front of the through lane may not be appropriate because there are left turn restrictions or there are through turn restrictions during certain times of our day, especially during the school time at that location. So
given that is such a dangerous location, it's really one of the most dangerous locations in the city for pedestrians and bikes. Can we get first have the committee receive what that plan is, so we get to see what we currently have designed, and then maybe we can agendize a review. And I know that there are real constraints, and so even with additional measures, we still have problems. And the afternoon westbound is a huge problem. For those who don't observe it, we have dozens of bikes who will queue up on both sides of the tracks, but mostly on the northwest side to go eastbound, crossing traffic in both directions. Dozens of bikes at once, facing cars moving forward. And so I think what we need to do is we need some videos so that everybody gets to see how hazardous and acute this is. Otherwise, we just take each other's, we either take somebody's word for it or we don't, but it is striking and when you see it.
Yeah, I like to note, and again, the intersection is there are a lot of right-of-way constraints. We do not own the right-of-way, and there's only limited improvements you can perform within the existing right-of-way. If the council so directs to have a project that requires significant modifications, and noting that we do have grade separation projects at this location, which will be an ultimate improvement at this location. So it all depends upon depends on the level of improvements in the interim that we would like to perform in order to.
First step to me is having everybody understand the problem and problem definition. And then, it is very constrained, but when the problem, and if it's treated as we must get real improvements to the problem, lo and behold, some things emerge that might not have emerged otherwise.
Let me suggest that, as was noted earlier, we coordinate with Caltrain, given that they have an ongoing project at the intersection, and have a coordinated report back to the committee.
Great. Thank you. Okay, thanks. Nadia?
I just wanted to note, right now, the traffic signal is up and the signage is up, but it's not really working yet, where we have no right turn on red to be able to go, I'm not good with my eastbound on Churchill to then go southbound on Alma. So the light is up and the sign is up. Does anyone else know what I'm talking about? But they're not activated yet. I've noticed that even now that the right turn is still allowed, it still backs up all the way to El Camino. And the El Camino light is, of course, Caltrans's light and not our light. So I just want to suggest that whenever that switch gets made, we do whatever we can to really be paying attention to how that light timing is going to go, because I suspect it's going to bring in a lot more people to Rail Committee to give you their thoughts on the new intersection improvements. But more importantly, I know it takes a long time sometimes to work with Caltrans to fix light timing, and we need to think about that. And then it bubbles over to the other thing, which is the new painted bike lanes and turns lane that's happening at El Camino right at that spot. Because if you queue up on that side waiting, then you're also in the bike lane. So I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, but I like to also note that there is a capacity constraints at that intersection. So it does not matter what improvements in signal timings you will make, there will be a delay. So the improvements are done to improve safety, so which means we have improved safety of the intersection, but that also then triggers delays to other legs. So having pre-signal means eliminating the right turns, which are during the green red times, and also bringing them back. So those queuing lengths will increase, but that would mean enhanced safety. So we have to give up something. It's trade-off that we are making with the safety. So
I think the point is, I recognize that. Thank you. I think all I'm saying is on El Camino, I don't think the turn pocket that they've painted relative to what I expect is probably going to be the length of the turn pocket needed, given the delay that's now going to happen, because you won't be able to turn right off from El Camino onto Churchill if it's still backed up, which means now you're queuing on El Camino, but it's at the spot where the bike and the bus thing are merging. So
I think that's a real risk, that we will have a backup of cars in the bike lane on El Camino as a result. And I think all of us know how difficult it is to deal with such a constrained area, that every bit of it is constrained. But I think we do need to anticipate the potential of some real significant problems as soon as that gets, that node right on red gets activated.
Yeah, and I like to note, in addition to this, that as part of the Churchill Avenue Bikeway Enhancement Project, there are improvements associated with El Camino Real and Churchill Avenue also.
Well, and a good point that when we get that bikeway improvement that's bidirectional, then we'll have even more bikes potentially riding on the north side of Churchill all the way to El Camino and into Stanford. So we'll see how positive that is on bike safety and capacity.
One more thing, Pat.
Yeah.
Just while we're on the subject of maybe someone bringing a video camera out to really capture the reality at Churchill and Alma with kids biking to Pali, I would make a plea for the same thing to happen on the other end of town. I'm on the gun end, and once the kids make it across Meadow, they wing down. They've got a stoplight to go through at Wilkie, then they've got a stoplight at Goodwill, and then it's a shared road where the bike lane, the green striping is on a one lane car street. It's the bikes and the kids all trying to make it on El Camino way to El Camino. And the speed, it's breathtaking. It's like a river of kids that are coming, and they know they have a certain amount of time to get to that El Camino light. And it's pretty dramatic. And I just, every time I'm driving in the opposite direction, I just worry about accidents happening. So I realize it's not train related, but it is bike related and kid related.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll recommend those for the bike and pet transportation plan updates.
Thank you. Okay, so that lets us move to.
To the
oops,
chair, we did have someone raise their hand for verbal update C.
Okay,
Roland, if you are there.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. The first thing I'd like to bring to your attention is that for some reason the save transcript button is disabled, so I'm not unable to save the transcript, which is very unfortunate because of all the great information that's being conveyed here. But the thing I want to touch on very briefly is the Sentry system. This system is actually the intrusion detection component in a quad gate system. And I actually made a presentation on this at a Caltrain board meeting 10 years ago, back in the days when members of the public were allowed to show YouTube videos. But unfortunately, there were technical difficulties and there was no audio. One significant aspect of the video is that intrusion detection system had an interface with the positive train control system, which made it possible to automatically stop approaching trains if there was any kind of obstruction on the tracks, including bikes, pedestrians, and large animals. So in closing, through the chair, I'm wondering if Caltrain have any plans to use the Sentry system to automatically stop approaching trains if there is any kind of obstruction on the tracks. Thank you.
thank you. Well, I can just share that the current system is that the rail sentry detection goes to the Caltrain, immediately to the Caltrain dispatch area, and then they examine what they're seeing and will either order a train to stop or not. That doesn't speak to the question of whether there might ever be a positive train control automated connection there. Okay. Sorry.
We had one more.
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
All right.
G, you can now speak.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. My name is Garima. My apologies for my name showing up like that. I'm Garima. I'm a mother of a Pali student who bikes to school through the Churchill and Alma intersection. And I really appreciate the points that have been brought up by the other community members and the council members. Thank you so much for your concern. I just wanted to add on to that same conversation. And I wanted to share that I've actually stood at the intersection of Churchill and Alma, and have kind of footage which demonstrates some of these concerns that have been brought up and are being discussed. And one of the things that I want to add to that is that not only are there physical constraints that are just sort of the limitations of that area, which is the small island spacing, which my colleague earlier spoke to. But there are also just violations that community members, people who are driving up and down those streets, getting to work, getting to school, dropping kids off. There's just violations that are happening that are further putting our kids at risk as they're trying to get to school. At that intersection in the morning should not be allowing traffic going on to Churchill, continuing on Churchill from east to west, going towards Pali, but we noticed dozens of cars still driving through. And secondly, we also noticed that the bike box next to Churchill, where there are no cars supposed to be parked for 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., there were cars parked. And so we are now starting to raise tickets for the city to help us with those traffic violations. But one request that we have is that we would like the city to consider having a crossing guard added to that intersection in an attempt to increase security for and just improve the safety of our kids. We have discussed this idea with a few of the city members already, and there were some thoughts raised around, these are high school kids and they don't necessarily benefit from having a security guard. But I'll tell you, there are some, we've talked to Pali kids and we've sort of received feedback from them, and they also feel strongly that having a crossing guard will indeed help our kids get to school safely. So I just wanted to bring that up, and would really appreciate if some thought could be given to that. So thank you so much for giving me the time.
Thank you. Okay, now we will proceed to item 1, which is to review a summary of the draft public outreach and engagement plan of the grade separation projects at Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston crossings.
Good afternoon, Ripan Bhatia, Interim Chief Transportation and Official. Sam, if you can please bring in the presentation. All right. Thank you. Next slide, please. Today, we are bringing you the outreach and engagement plan for our grade separation project. With me today, we have Jill Gibson from Kimley Horn representing Caltrain, and Audrey Brook, Director for Capital Program Delivery from Caltrain, and myself presenting on this topic. Next slide, please. So our agenda for today is to provide you an overview and seek feedback on the draft public outreach and engagement plan. And then also, we like to note that we do have a engineering firm on board for our preliminary engineering 15% development plan, and we'd like to introduce that team and their role later in this presentation. Next slide, please. Next slide. So just to refresh everyone that the project, the grade separation project involves 3 crossings, the Churchill Avenue, Meadow Drive, and Charleston Road. And Churchill Avenue crossings also includes a pedestrian and bicycle crossing at a Seal Avenue location that crosses from Seal Avenue into the Pierce Park on the other side. Next slide, please. And in June 2024, Council had selected underpass and hybrid alternative for Meadow and Charleston to proceed forward into the preliminary engineering and environmental design phase. For Churchill Avenue, the Council has selected locally preferred selected, which is the partial underpass. However, also kept street closure as a backup alternative. Next slide, please. The council, after discussion on the existing alternatives, asked staff and rail committee to review further these concept plan and improve safety, mobility, and look into minimizing the potential private property impacts. Staff, as the part of this program in this earlier phase, will be looking into to developing the refining these concepts for the level into the 15%, but and keeping these projects goal in mind. Next slide, please. So our first, right now, we are in refining in this phase where we are looking into refining the concepts. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a design firm on board. Caltrain and city staff work together to bring to do a proposal, request for proposal, and bring in a engineering firm look into this earlier design development to 15% level. Staff would like to bring this and bring this iterative design for the rail committee's review in fall of this year at our next rail committee meeting, perhaps. And before that, we'd also look into some community engagement, which we will be discussing in these next few slides. And based on rail committee's review and decisions, we will also bring that to the city council for their direction, and then we'll advance the selected alternatives. Our objective would be to bring one alternative for each of those crossing to the 15% level, but based on rail committee's review, we'll look into developing the alternatives to the next 15% level. And for the decision point 2, where we would select an alternative and proceed into 35% design and environmental phase during 2027, most of 2027. Next slide, please. And I'll hand it off to Jill Gibson, who will go over the outreach and engagement plan.
Thanks, Ripon. You can go to the next slide. So the draft public outreach and engagement plan, which we're talking about tonight, and welcome your feedback and input. The overall purpose is really this is a framework for targeted engagement over the next couple of years. And the purpose, of course, is to communicate key project information, provide opportunities for community input and engagement, and ultimately to foster understanding so that people can truly provide input. The components include outreach strategies by the different milestones, really looking at the tools and tactics that we can use, working through who are the partners and community members that should be engaged, identifying the particular activities, importantly, tracking the input, tracking who is participating, evaluating their input, and ultimately reporting that input is very important. And then finally, the overall engagement schedule. So as we talked about at the last rail committee, we're working through an integrated project team approach with Caltrain and the city and Kinley Horn leading the overall engagement and strong collaboration with both Caltrain and the city. Next slide, please. So the role of the engagement team, really facilitating, and the purpose is community outreach. That's what we're doing is really fostering engagement, strengthening the many community partnerships that exist here in the city, collecting and synthesizing community feedback, fostering two-way communication and being very transparent and responsive throughout the project. And then importantly, relaying that information and the community feedback and perspectives to policymakers, to decision makers, rail committee, and city council. Next slide, please. So our goals, we've got 5, educate and inform. So really provide the community with clear information. There's a lot of history here, but really focusing the information, the objectives and the alternatives. Through engagement, ensuring accessible platforms and diverse opportunities, whether that's digital, in-person, paper, opportunities for folks to engage. Soliciting input, so actively gathering feedback to better understand the community needs and priorities, sharing that feedback, sharing the community insights that we've heard and learned, and sharing that clearly to decision makers, and ultimately through the iteration with the technical work, presenting the alternatives and the input that we receive to policy makers and decision makers to ultimately for y'all's evaluation, consideration, and ultimately decision on how to advance the project. Next slide. So Ripon walked through the overall schedule, and you can see here the iteration of the technical work, that top line item, refining that the concept, is where we are right now, working towards decision point 1. So then we'll be having community meetings in advance of that September rail committee, sometime in the late August timeframe, to be able to bring that feedback here to rail committee and city council. Then having technical workshops during that 15% design phase to really roll up our sleeves and get into the details with community members on the concept design, having open houses that lead to that decision point 2. That is coming back to rail committee, going to city council to gain the direction on what alternatives move through environmental. So you can see here, this is just a graphic trying to describe the interplay of the technical work, the community engagement, and ultimately the policy decision-making that happens through rail committee and city council. Next slide, please. So then if we can just focus on the conceptual development phase, so that's through 15%. Again, we have really 2 decision points. So we have 2 community meetings in advance of that rail committee and city council meeting where we're coming back here with the refined concepts for your, so we'll bring the community feedback here along with the technical work for your direction to then advance the alternatives to 15%. So that in that 15% phase, we'll be having 2 technical workshops and an open house to then lead to that decision point 2. That is where rail committee and city council provide the direction on which alternatives advance to environmental. Next slide, please. And then during the preliminary engineering and environmental phase, we have 2 community meetings planned. We have an opportunity for 6 technical workshops and 1 open house over the period of about a year and a half. And so the purpose of these technical workshops is really to get into the technical components such as the trade-offs of right-of-way and mobility. We'll have cost estimates to share, updated cost estimates, and be able to talk about the constructability of the project. And so we want to have focused workshops with folks that really want to get into the details of the draft concepts or draft alternatives. So communication strategies, really importantly, leveraging the existing networks, the strong partnerships that exist in the city, providing interactive, accessible content. These alternatives and the components are pretty complex. So making sure that we're providing really accessible and engaging material, providing language translation services where it's applicable. And then importantly, managing and maintaining a community inquiry tracker. So making sure that all of the public comments and responses are documented and we can provide that here. And then in terms of tools, both digital, printed, short form content, the amount of information can be overwhelming. So making sure that it's really accessible. Brochures, flyers, surveys. We have working on developing a project website and social media. Next slide, please. So we do have a draft up on the Caltrain website, caltrain.com/projects/CMCGS for Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston grade separation. I'm trying to come up with as short of a name that we can, but QR code is there. Oh. Yeah, we do. Yeah, that's right. Well, welcome feedback tonight for that. And we're working on building this out, and then it will be linked to the city's website, et cetera. Next slide. So as Rippon mentioned, Caltrain and the city have been working on the procurement for the design team, and the TY Lin team was selected and have been just kicked off in the last couple of weeks. So they will be on board to advance the concepts and through 15% design. Next slide, please. So we talked about this, I believe, at the last rail committee, but again, they're working on the concept refinement, including data collection, developing a basis of design report, providing preliminary technical analysis, and updating the conceptual design plan to then come back to rail committee. Then working forward through the 15% design, as well as Caltrain leading an independent cost estimate and schedule to inform that decision making for that decision point 2 and final report. Back to you, Rippon.
All right, so we do have a schedule to come back to Rail Committee in September with to review the refined concepts. And in November, we'll also look at the scope for the 35% preliminary engineering and environmental documentation scope. So we'll share that information in November, provide continuous updates throughout the process at every Rail Committee meeting. And then we are hoping to wrap up the 15% design in early spring and bring it back to Rail Committee in May for recommendations to the City Council for proceeding with the 35% design and environmental documentation. Next slide, please. So tonight, we just like to hear any feedback or comments on our engagement plan, and that way we can incorporate that and prepare the final plan.
If I might also just make a comment, related to this plan, I just wanted to acknowledge and point out how important it is that we are proceeding to this next phase. Over the last couple of days, I've had a conversation with a resident who's actually identified their properties identified for potential take as a part of the project. And as such, really reinforces the sense of urgency around refining the design. The City Council's definitely placed a priority on trying to minimize property impacts through the design. And so this work will really provide the information necessary for the follow-up decisions, and ultimately that individual property owners are making with respect to their own properties, continued investment or their thoughts on sale. It does, as was pointed out, the fact that we're having these conversations is an issue of disclosure for property owners that are potentially impacted by the designs. And as such, just really reinforces the importance of moving forward on this.
We can do questions and then see if we have members of the public. Any questions? Okay.
Through the chair, I don't know if the city attorneys can weigh in, but I believe that there's actually a legal requirement for what percentage of project completion we're at before there's actually a disclosure necessary for any real estate stuff. We went through this with the high-speed rail stuff, and I don't know what that number is, and was wondering if you guys did.
I don't specifically, but I do think it's been very clear that we have properties that are part of our public discussion. And as such, I think it presents a dilemma for anyone who is in the process of selling the property to be aware of that and not share it.
Ed?
Well, I have a number of questions, but they aren't technical questions. They're just sort of process questions. Should I?
Go ahead.
I'll try them and you can rule them out if you want. As you go into, you've done these things before, you're the experts on this. As you go into this, what would you sort of predict that we would find out that we don't now know already from our side, not from the point of view of hearing residents and letting them get more up to speed, but from our side, do you think we'll discover new things after this many years that we've been working on it and listening to citizens and so on? Just want to know what the expectations are.
You mean from a technical approach?
No, from the point of view of, oh, this is what we learned from the community that you don't know yet that's going to help influence.
I don't know that I have any preconceived ideas of what we are going to learn. But I think that it's, our approach is to, really as much as we can, communicate what the trade-offs are and do the best that we can to provide a diversity of ways in which people can really meaningfully understand the different alternatives and the trade-offs from whether it's a mobility or a trade-off or a right-of-way trade-off, but really be able to have the members of the public enter into a true understanding of the decisions that are on the table. And I know that you all have done a fantastic job of that over the years. So to answer your question, I don't think I have a kind of a preconceived idea of new things that we're going to learn.
Okay. Another specific one, when you talk about reaching underrepresented groups.
Yeah.
How would you define that, or how would you know one when you found one?
Sure thing. I think about potentially folks that maybe don't traditionally engage in projects like this for a variety of reasons. So it could be senior citizens. It could be youth. Certainly different languages, but I think it could be a variety of folks that just don't traditionally come out to the public meetings. Maybe the times that they work aren't conducive to the traditional 6 to 8 p.m. meetings. So it's just being mindful of that and providing a variety of opportunities, both in language and in time and in format that folks can engage.
Okay. And then sort of different, the same statement, different outcome. You guys are the experts on this. So how can we help you? How can we best help you as the committee? Because you know what you're doing. And, for us to give you more details on more social media instead of newspaper ads is not what you want. So
yeah,
can you direct us what you want today?
I appreciate that question. I think helping get out the word. Once we have the digital platform set up, once we have the meetings and the opportunities, just helping promote is something that, definitely we would appreciate your partnership in helping to promote. And, one of the, certainly I mentioned the partnerships in one of the slides, really leveraging the networks that the city and Caltrain and others have. So I think leveraging the networks you have would be really appreciated.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is, there's a lot of meetings planned.
Yeah.
And therefore you must think that that's productive. Yet it's at this first stage, which is still conceptual.
Yeah.
So is that productive for the citizens because they get more up to speed on that in this many meetings?
Yeah. So during the conceptual, I don't know if you want to bring up the slide, but during the conceptual development, it is slide 15, if you don't mind. Thank you. Oh, it's mine 15. It's probably different for you. So for the conceptual development phase, if you will, we have 2 community meetings in advance of the rail committee meeting in which we'll be providing an update on the concept design. So the idea is that, hey, we're going to the communities, right? 2, so one on Churchill Seal and one focused on Meadow Charleston. And we're gathering input and feedback there. And in advance of then coming to rail committee so that we were able to both share the technical work and the update with rail committee as well as the feedback that we're hearing. So the idea is that really there's an integration of the technical work and the community engagement in advance of rail committee updates. So then 2 technical workshops and 1 open house during that 15% plan development. And again, that's in advance of that decision point 2 for rail committee and city council.
Yeah, I had fewer questions on the second phase, even though there's 9 meetings. But so that helps. That helps with this. So thank you. That's all.
Okay. Do we have members of the public who'd like to speak?
We do. Our first speaker is going to be Melinda M.
Thank you. Thank you, Rail Committee. Having attended feedback meetings from the beginning and now hearing this presentation again, I'm just really, to your question, Mayor allowing, that was exactly my question. It's like, we're going to get feedback for what purpose, what action would be taken. Has a decision already been reached from what I understand that we're going with a hybrid crossing, hybrid grade separation? If I'm going to a meeting because my neighborhood Fair Meadow would be hugely impacted by this. What feedback can I and my neighbors give that would actually make any difference? And I'm actually in a place where I want to know more about timelines and budgets. And is this, you hear in the news, this is happening, this is not happening. I'm sorry for being so inarticulate here. I just am perplexed as to what feedback I would give, again, without having, if you're coming to me as a community member with something concrete that says on January 1, the road's going to be closed, they're going to set up construction trucks on my street, like feedback is such a nebulous thing that in my experience, I want to know feedback for what action would be happening. And I also am not hearing anything here about our first major issue, which is the quiet zones, how that interacts with this grade separation. And then this next step of construction that will be so incredibly disruptive to our neighborhood. So maybe, I don't know. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Myra A.
Hello again. It's really interesting to see the project. Thank you. It's a lot of hope that gets to my heart. But I have a very, very basic question as a member of the community, as a mom. The Great Separation has been discussed for decades, since the train has been there. How are you going to make sure that this time this is going to happen? And who's going to give the continuity that's required to make this happening? Because people move to different jobs, the public servants, they move to other positions, and then who's going to pick up the and keep this project alive? If we're not going to go back to the desk and draw it again and ask the public for feedback again, and we're going to be in this loop forever. So I just want to make sure that there's continuity, and this time this is really going to happen. That's just my comment. Thank you.
Our next speaker is John M.
Hello, I'm John Melnichuk. I live across the street from the railway between Meadow and Charleston Crossing on the narrow drive. Manager Shiketa talked about people having to notify about selling their properties if they're under consideration for damage. The Great Separation Project, it seems to me, you're not going to like this because maybe the train has already left the station, to use the phrase. The premise of proceeding at all with Great Separation, given other improvements in quiet zones, even in fact having crossing guards at the level crossings and the bicycle tunnels. What else could we do with $800 to $1 billion? Our city, along with other homeowners, have experienced a lot of problems with mega projects or even household renovation projects. They're always over budget. They're very complicated. They're very expensive. Could the city do something else with $800 to $1 billion that high-speed rail will not contribute to? Could we not proceed? Is that an option? Could the city band together with other cities facing the same engineering and budgetary problems dealing with Great Separation and make a ballot measure, go back to the state? Could they band together and litigate to get high-speed rail to pay its fair share at least and not saddle the cities with this very difficult problem? When I look at the proposals that are on the table now, the most effective, least disruptive, most expensive project or approach has been discarded, and that's a tunnel from one end to the other. It's technically possible, but very expensive. In this kind of situation, it's going to scar our city for a long time. When I look at the proposals about putting shoe fly tracks down Alma Street for a number of years, and having 24-hour construction that we've suffered with electrification for years on end and disrupted sleep. I'm not looking forward to that, and I would consider leaving the city because of that. And as I mentioned before, I would have to incur a considerable tax burden for leaving the city that I've enjoyed for 22 years and made my career here. I'd be very disappointed that we can't find a better solution than proceeding with a very expensive compromise that will harm a lot of people for a number of years. The construction project itself will be harmful to us beyond what's the scarring left behind. And the animations that were available to me on the city website show that there's no plantings, there's a concrete wall across from my street where there's now trees, no sidewalks, perfect for urban blight with graffiti, no plantings, nothing. The traffic circle proposed for Mumford doesn't look that great either in terms of workability. We're stuck with the terrible geography we inherited. Can we do nothing? And would that be better? That's my question.
Our next speaker is Roland.
Thanks again. So before I ask a couple of very quick questions to the chair, I'd like to follow up on the previous speaker's comment. Is that I think it's important for all of us to remember that $1 million is the cost of $1 million home. And $1 billion is the cost of 1,000 $1 million homes. The other point the speaker made was about two flies on Alma. And I'm very happy to report to you that using modern construction techniques, you can actually, you got all the room that you need to build a viaduct over Meadow and Charleston without requiring any shoe flies on Alma. Now, moving to the questions, the first question I have got is about the source of funds for this project, specifically whether this is coming from 2016 Measure B, and if so, whether these funds come from the $700 million earmark for grade separation. The reason I'm asking this question is that currently the funding for capturing the grade crossing strategy is coming from the $314 million earmark for corridor capacity improvements, which are designed to carry more passengers on the tracks, not enabling more cars to cross the track. The last question I have, let me preface this, is that I learned this morning that the San Francisco delegation has recently returned from a trip to Japan, which was organized by the Bay Area Council, and they came back with a remarkable amount of information about how Japan financed and delivered their transportation infrastructure for a fraction of the cost, which we are currently incurring all of the North America. Oh, and by the way, the operations don't require an operating subsidy. They actually make a profit, just like Hong Kong. So in closing, the question here is that I'm wondering through the chair if it would be possible to reach out to this delegation, presumably to the Bay Area Council, and find out more about how the Japanese approach grade separation of electrified railway lines without interrupting service. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Eric N.
I just want to make sure that any other.
Hello, this is Eric Norman. I just had a quick comment. You're planning on having, social media and other types of things. That may be good, but I would like to say that the devil's in the details, and it's very important to have very good renderings and drawings uploaded onto the on the web where people can look at real details and understand what's really happening. Thank you.
And I just want to say any other members of the public who wish to speak need to sign up at this time. We're going to cut off speakers.
Our next speaker is David M.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for letting me speak. I appreciate that. I've got, I guess, three things I'd like to address very quickly. One of them is my understanding is that this meeting was primarily about the outreach program so that we can talk about getting more input from the community. And I want to thank you for talking about who's not being reached. There are a lot of people. I live on Seal Avenue, and when I learned about this project, nobody in the neighborhood knew about it. I went and knocked on doors and talked to people and actually pulled information from the website, including the diagrams and the information, and tried to get people to understand what was going on. And a bunch of folks came out, and we've got a whole mailing list in the community that we're trying to keep up to date on this. I'm going to be calling back to them when I get out of here tonight. But I want to make sure that we remember to bring in the students at Pally. We see so many of them piling up at these crossings. You've observed very astutely that there's no place for the bicycles. There's no place for the crossings. And the plans that we're talking about here are going to have an enormous impact on them. I've got a kid who goes to Pally, and I go through these crossings every single day. And I can tell you that I also go through the Cal Ave tunnel almost every day. And the idea for the Seal tunnel is very, very concerning. The kids don't want to go through these tunnels. If we stop the bicycles and the pedestrians crossing at Churchill, I think that that's going to be such an enormous disruption that we need to get the high school community involved, not just the neighbors and the homeowners right around it. And I would certainly recommend substantial signage right at these crossings indicating when these meetings are going to be happening. My experience in our neighborhood is nobody knows what's going on, and we really, really need to get out to people. And social media and little postcards are not going to do it. Signs in the neighborhood, signs at those crossings are going to be necessary. And so I want to use my remaining minute for two other things. One, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. That was the most important part. You know what? I'm going to let the other pieces go because the other pieces were more technical issues related to the project itself, which are probably more suitable to the community meetings themselves. Today is mostly about the outreach program, right? So let's stick with that. Thank you very much for your attention. Oh, and thank you also for making sure that we had that backup plan included in the diagram for closing Churchill to car traffic. I think that's a really important option to consider, something more like we have over at Homer. Sorry.
And our final speaker is Penny E.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I just have a couple of questions. One is I really appreciate that staff will be doing this outreach and that they're going to synthesize the feedback that they get for everyone. But I just want to get confirmation that all the raw data that's collected will be attached or included in the reports in some form. I hope someone can confirm that that is the case, because sometimes it's not in staff reports lately. And the question that a previous speaker asked about who's going to keep this project alive, I think this is an important one. Having worked on the Charleston and Rostadero plan for 25 years, I can tell you that project multiple times. I mean, we went through 19 public hearings, countless study sessions, and I can't even count the number of meetings. But I want to say that having every time there were staff transitions, the project was at risk. And I think that that is going to be the case for this project. So I would have really loved to hear that question answered. I did notice also when I was looking through the budget, the proposed budget for the city, that a lot of federal money is being dependent on for this project. And I'm wondering what alternative funding sources the city is thinking about if federal funding for this kind of thing dries up. And I also wanted to say that I went back into the materials to just sort of refresh my memory today. And it really is challenging to find materials. So I hope that as new people are entering this process, perhaps it's necessary to put together a new website that's like a primer for people who are coming at this fresh and new, so they can easily find the materials they really need to know to get started. Because I I would like to have a place where I could point people. I think it would be helpful toward getting better feedback. Thank you so much for your time.
That concludes public comment.
Thank you. Okay, so we can now return to the committee for any other questions and comments and discussion. Really focused on the communication plan, but there'll be other elements. Julie?
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate the presentation and public comments. My first thought is about the number of meetings and the nature of the meetings. And I know the mayor just signaled that maybe we're having too many meetings, or certainly there are a lot of meetings, but I actually had the opposite concern about step one. We have 2 community meetings planned, but one is on Churchill and Seal, and the second is on Meadow Charleston. So if you care about Meadow Charleston, for example, and you can't make that one meeting, you've lost the opportunity to give your feedback. I'm honing in on Meadow Charleston because I don't even think they should be lumped together for purposes of these conversations. The underpass options require complex construction projects in order to fashion the roundabout on Charleston and the U-turn on Meadow. These are very different projects associated with the underpass. They also each have a hybrid option, which comes with its own option of earthen wall or podium viaduct style, but lower. So you've got many, many options when you're trying to put it all out there for Meadow Charleston. We lump them together because they're a third of a mile apart, but these are 2 very different. If they both end up being hybrids, it'll feel far more similar, but who knows? And so I worry that one community meeting in step 1 on Charleston Meadow is going to be a mess. And I think you're going to have people frustrated. They didn't get all the information. They didn't get to say what they think because there's too much information that you got to provide about those 2. This may be true about Churchill Seal. I don't know that area as well. So I just want us to, it's been handy to lump these projects together for certain aspects of this timeline. But I think now when we're talking about engaging the people who have opinions, particularly people who are going to be impacted, we might want to disaggregate Charleston and Meadow. My next concern is about the sequencing of the engagement where we have what's called community meeting and then a technical workshop. I'm concerned because we have public commenters who are deeply concerned about the impact on their property, their lives, the kids they know and love. We also have people who are curious and want to be involved in community decision-making. And there may be some overlap in those groups, but they are potentially also distinct groups. The people who are worried. And if the community outreach meeting happens first, particularly if you lump Charleston and Meadow together for one community outreach meeting, I think you're going to be swamped with people who want to know the technicalities about what is happening, what's going to happen to my property, what's the timing, all of that. And if you say, oh, that's for the next meeting, this is just community engagement. The technical meeting is 3 months from now or 2 months, whatever it is. I think it might feel like pitchforks. You know, like, what are you talking about? We came to this meeting. We got childcare. We didn't go to work today because you were saying that, you know, so the obligation to communicate exactly what the community, that first community outreach meeting is and isn't, that the technical meeting is coming and when, I think you might be better off calling the big meeting, you know, having some introductory remarks. For those of you interested in just learning more and providing us your feedback, go in room A. For those of you who are really technical and wonky and want to dive into go into room B. Then you get sort of the universe, and maybe you hold 2 of those instead of community and tech, community outreach and then technical. If you do big meeting on, you know, Charleston, big meeting on Meadow, and have both possibilities for engagement. It's just a different way to frame the issues and to try to ensure that the people get what they need. Do with that what you will. It's just the way my brain worked around how I would want to be presented with this information if it was impacting me. Relatedly, I'm not seeing in the plan an acknowledgement of the potential anxiety and even anger that some community members might be feeling if their property happens to be in the way of our potential plans. Yes, it's a public works project. It's infrastructure improvement, modernization, safety, mobility are going to be enhanced. And as we of course know, for a small number of people in our community, it could potentially be quite devastating. And I just hope that you have a way of talking about that thoughtfully and succinctly in your description of the content that will be provided in the concluding paragraph on what you're trying to achieve. Where I come from, acknowledging the truth of something, the difficult things is far better than not doing it, because a good process where people feel seen and heard helps you get more buy-in for the ultimate outcome. Whereas if people don't feel seen and heard in the process and they don't like the outcome, that's when you really get anger and disengagement and sort of consequences that can reverberate well beyond. So as hard as it is to engage with people who might, in a city of 68,000, be the 100 that are really negatively impacted, I think that's part of the work of this, is to really figure out how to be transparent and respectful, empathetic in that space. Relatedly, I noticed that the English, that language fact sheets were going to be provided in English and Spanish. And I just, the next item on our agenda speaks to language diversity in our community, where we learn that Asian and Pacific Islander languages are far more common than Spanish in our city. Now, that is a large grouping. Who knows when you actually look at it? I would wager that Mandarin is equally, if not more, popular. So please look into that, because we do want to be sure that people have access to this technical, important, confusing information in a language they understand. Our city clerk has got some language translation services that she's been using in chambers, where there's an app. She tells everyone, scan the QR code, and then people can, whatever language they speak, it's not about predicting the most common. It's let people know about the app, invite them to use it, and then they can click the QR code and all the information comes. It's whatever is said over the airwaves, over the microphone, gets translated into written copy in the language of choice. And I think that's probably the way to really to speak to underrepresented groups, and to be sure that anyone who walks in the door with a curiosity or concern can hear it in their language. I think that would be going quite a long way. And then finally, to spur the participation of underrepresented groups, which was a question raised, a meeting from 6 to 8 p.m., if that's the time chosen. I know it's hypothetical. There's no good time. There's no perfect time. But anybody with little kids, very often these days, people will provide childcare for a meeting that is deemed, really important for people to attend, but impossible to attend if you have little kids. And I don't know if Caltrain ever does that, or if the city ever does that, but it certainly is a way to signal to younger families who are more likely to be in the lesser expensive homes in Palo Alto that might be the ones impacted. Hey, we want to make it possible for you to attend. So if we could throw some resources at providing childcare for these meetings, I think it would really send a good message to the community. And that is all my feedback. Thank you.
Ed?
I think as we go into these things, and we need to tell them what we haven't decided, and be very clear about that. And then also be very clear, circle the calendar in red sort of thing on these decision points that we are going to make. So a couple people said, when's this going to be made? Another gentleman said, why are we doing this? And I think, the facts and speaking the truth is what we always want to do. So there's a possibility that we can't raise any money. So we want to do it, but we can't. So it just has to be put on hold. So that needs to be put on the table as a fact of life. These costs, we're not going to get any checks written to us from Donald J. Trump. So that's out. So I think we need to put that there. And then this go, no go deal at the 15% level is really critical. And we can make a decision there, go and fund one, not go at all. There's all kinds of decision tree things there. So folks really need to be in the loop on that. So the possibility of not doing this, I think, is definitely hanging there. And none of us like that. Citizens don't, and we don't. We'd rather have certainty, working as hard as we are and spending money now on the project. But I think that's an example of a key fact that has to be on the table as we look at this. I think in the conceptual development phase, which is obviously first, by definition, because it's conceptual, I'm not sure as much of the technical stuff is crucial. But each one of these citizens is going to have a different perspective when they walk in the room, and it's your management task to give them all what they need, and it's going to be a lot different. So the second part of that is that we could also have a lineup of outside resources that you could look at. I think it was mentioned maybe two meetings ago here that at some point, none of us want to do eminent domain. We're already on the table saying we don't want to do that. And we've already said that it's just the standard way of looking at big, huge projects like this that are going to impact the city forever. But somebody wants to know what happens about that, then we should have a checklist of here's the 3 people or 3 websites you can call to get information about that, or if it's a city source or whatever, so that we can help them even look at the contingencies so they can do some of the planning. And I picked that one because it's a big angst item as it should be. Just one thing that popped in my mind as Julie was talking is, can this be taped video? Can we do, that shouldn't be too hard to do, right? So there's a backup. So if somebody can't make.
I don't see any issue with that. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah. I mean, it's a process you got to go through and pay somebody to do it. But then there would be a resource that if they couldn't make that meeting, they couldn't participate in the next meeting because it doesn't exist, to your point, but at least they would be able to see what was going on there and the information that was put forth. So, okay, that's all for now.
So I wanted to just echo a lot of what Julie said. I think we've been through a lot of community meetings, and the challenge is real. There's always brand new people coming who are like, I've never heard this. Nobody's ever emailed me. And then there are those of us who've been around for 10 years like, well, let me show you my stack of papers. And so, it doesn't matter. It's new for them, and that's what matters. And so I think all the things that Julie talked about are really important. As I look about and listen to some of the public comment, we keep coming back to the same things and to the idea of probably having to have a new website. I know we're going to retire the old one and we have to come up with something new, but I think we have to communicate where the funding for the current work is coming from, because people don't quite understand that we won some grants and Measure B and how does that all get sliced and diced? I think it's really important to explain how grade separations are traditionally funded, because I don't think people recognize just how much really comes from the federal government. And so if they're not going to write us a check, these are not likely to get built because we're not likely to fund them ourselves. And I think that that's something that is really critical for people to understand going forward. I think it's also important, so people don't get super annoyed, to understand that Mountain View and Burlingame have been going through this process for a long time, have had their projects fairly well baked, and are sitting in the funding pile with their hands open. And that's why we do have to continue the work, because I think it's just both like, hey, the money's probably not coming soon, and your kids may graduate from high school even if they're in kindergarten right now, but we might still be in line for grade separations. That's just how this goes. I think we need an explainer of how quiet zones plus grade separations plus the safety improvements are all interacting, because frankly, to the average person, a train is a train and you're doing a whole bunch of stuff at the same time, and they don't know what matters. I think it's really important to explain all the other alternatives that were removed from consideration and why. We heard a public comment saying, well, the tunnel was taken away and technically we could do that. Well, not without taking out way more homes than anyone wanted. And so, yes, you could technically do it, but the destruction would be bad. I think we have to go back and refresh people on some of those themes. The images that were on the Connecting Palo Alto website were there to help the committee at the time understand the construction process. They are terrible videos for explaining what those things look like. We heard a comment saying, well, that doesn't have any vegetation in front of it and flowers. Well, that was supposed to be a construction sequencing video and not a final product video. And I don't expect anyone to understand that, because nowhere in the video do we say that. But, when we look at the materials going forward, and frankly, it's been so long, the technology has changed, so we can do a better job. I think we need to do that. I also think we need to talk about different construction methods and how things are getting better, and because that is sure to come up. We have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is what is happening with high-speed rail. And that's never an easy conversation, but explaining that you can't draw blood from a stone is important to explain. And how does it impact? And that goes back to, why are we doing this, right? In 2019, and before, the conversation was, well, Caltrain is going to have all these trains and we have all this ridership and our trains are full. That's not what's going on anymore. And so the story has changed and you need to be able to explain what's happening. And I think part of the case that you have to explain is that even some of the assumptions on both ridership and also the traffic things were pre-COVID, right? And they may change going forward as a result of all the RENA conversations and the housing conversations we've had. And that's going to have to be explained. And that leads into making sure that there is a higher understanding and explanation to the public about what the traffic patterns are, because that impacts why Meadow and Charleston look different and why thing is on one side of the street and not the other side of the street. Because without that information, it looks very biased to one side, and you have to understand what those are. And I think it's important also for the public to understand that the council has made a decision to make Churchill a lower priority, because right now they seem like they're even in this process. And I don't think that that's really clear, and it's important to communicate that as we go through this. So I know it's a lot. We've been doing this for a long time. And for a lot of us, it's a lot of repetition, but there's brand new people. They have no idea. We've got to tell the story again. And to as much as we can say what's been decided and what hasn't been is super useful. Thank you.
Well, first, I think following up on a number of Nadia's comments, we need to expect that we'll have a mix of people who are coming from ground zero and people who have some familiarity and people who have been in the trenches on this for years. And so in that context, I am concerned that we are focused on diving into, here are the alternatives that we're considering, as opposed to, we're going to step back. Why do we think we need to do grade separations? In that context, why did we think we needed to do them in 2019? And what did we think was the urgency at that time versus what we now think and what we best understand is the level of urgency. And then it's been a year or so since we left off on kind of looking at the design alternatives. At that time, we had gone from our designs, what we had come up with the city, and run them past Caltrain, and Caltrain blew up our designs because they had a whole bunch of their own design standards that said we can't do what we wanted to do, what was most cost effective, or what would be least impactful on neighbors. Then we went into negotiations with them, made some progress there, have narrowed those differences, but we haven't closed them. And this process was going to be working at that next step of closing those differences. Even at a high level at Caltrain, there is this contradiction between, or a conflict between Caltrain saying we have a corridor crossing strategy, that a big part of that is how do we really work with cities to enable grade crossings and now safer and better at grade crossings if we can't fund grade separations everywhere. And that being, we at Caltrain are trying to help. And then we have all our own Caltrain rules that screw everything up. And so Caltrain has agreed this year that we as a board will struggle through to attempt to reconcile those two different sets of objectives. And hopefully that will come sooner rather than later, because in the meantime, we're fighting these battles with Caltrain on kind of a point-by-point basis, design basis. So then we are looking at now this set of alternatives and moving the ball forward on design within that constraint of what will Caltrain let us do. And we had a whole bunch of backlash once we came out with what Caltrain said they would let us do. And it had far more impacts on homes and the community than we had hoped for. And we tried to tell the community, this is not the final answer. This is where we are right now before we see how many of these problems we can solve. That's not a guarantee we can solve them all, but that's the process we're in. And that goes to, your slide 7, where project goals, improving safety, mobility, minimizing environmental impacts, and minimizing property impacts. I think we as a city have gone through and had a whole bunch of criteria. Those goals, those goals are the reasons we're doing this and the ways that we're trying to make these projects as good as we can. I think we need to go into a lot more depth there, and that's probably the intention. But we see that we have safety first, sort of the way this is ordered, safety first, mobility second. In 2017, when we were under the understanding, based on Caltrain's business plan, that they were going to go from 5.5 trains an hour at peak hour, which is the same time you have the maximum number of cars, to 8 trains an hour, and then with high-speed rail, potentially up to 12 or more trains an hour, and more cars on the road, it was going to be gridlock if we didn't do grade separations. And it looked like we wouldn't have time to do them before it was gridlock, and really facing a real dilemma. That has changed, and we need to explain that change. That's one of the things Nadia was talking about. That is a big change. That not only is Caltrain now, we're at 4 trains an hour, a spread out schedule, and the peak hour trains are up to maybe half full. We're a long ways from ever getting up to 8 trains an hour. High-speed rail still has to be allowed for the possibility that will come, but that likelihood is, despite the governor's budget, less and less likely, and certainly unlikely in 15 years. Even with their plan, it's unlikely in 15 years. But we have to, at this point in time, plan for that possibility. Caltrain, again, is this coming year supposed to update their projections. That's also in a context of regional projections that before the last few years, our region and our state were scheduled to grow massively. The state was scheduled to grow from 39 million people to by 2060, 60 million. The projections by Caltrans and the State Department of Finance are that by 2060, the state will be 37 to 39 million people. Now, that may be low if we reduce housing costs and increase housing and address our transit needs, but it ain't going to be 60 million. And county by county, they have their own estimates, but that is a drastic difference in the infrastructure needs that would be required to accommodate those kinds of population growths. So that the whole format table has changed there. It does mean that we probably have enough time to do what we think we need to do before we have gridlock. We didn't have enough time even before. That was scary. So all that is context for why we're doing what we're doing, including the question of, how do we get narrowed down to 2 alternatives at each location? And all the people are going to want to reopen that basket and say, wait a minute, why not a trench? Why not a tunnel? Why not overpass? All those things. That's going to have to get covered at the outset, because there will be a bunch of people who say, no, that's the dumbest idea I ever thought of. It should be my idea. and we've heard this all the time. Every alternative has people who say, not a few people who say, all the other ideas are downright stupid, and I have the solution, and it's every one of the solutions has advocates who believe that. So we have to face up to where we need to address all of that. Then we have, okay, what do we need to do? What can we afford to do? And at Caltrain, there's a real recognition now that what we had assumed of grade separating the whole corridor, that was maybe a $10 billion project, and we had a fraction of that we could identify. It's now more like a $20 billion project, and that fraction is even lower. As a result, as part of the Caltrain corridor crossing strategy, we have adopted an approach that's called enhanced crossing strategy, meaning what can we do in the near term, other than grade separations, to make those grade crossings safer, higher capacity, reduce the environmental impacts, and those three buckets. And in essence, that's a lot of what we're already proceeding on at Churchill and with the quiet zones at Charleston Meadow. And that becomes either an interim measure, perhaps at Charleston Meadow, and an indefinite measure at Churchill. And that goes back to, we had property impacts at Churchill and ones at Charleston Meadow, both legitimately equal concerns. As Nadia mentioned, we have prioritized Charleston Meadow because South Palo Alto has no grade separations, and because, as problematic as it is, it's a 120-foot wide corridor versus a 60 or 65-foot wide one at Churchill. Is just a little more elbow room and more feasible to do grade crossings there. But the costs have gone through the roof. We have Measure B that was, our share of Measure B was 370 million. Maybe it's around 400 million, depending on the sales tax revenues. Mountain View, for instance, was virtually shovel ready. They thought at Ringsdorf until January last year. They had complete design, 262 million, and it jumped to 325 million in January of 2024. Threw everything up in the air for them. That was a big problem until January of 2025, when the estimate went up to 453 million. So that has been a real come to God for cities and Caltrain. Same thing similarly on Broadway in Burlingame. Just the cost has gone through the roof. It doesn't mean that we will never get federal dollars. We actually, these dollars that we have on state and federal grants are part of why we are moving forward, is because once the FTA and the state give you those design dollars, they are much more likely to eventually fund construction. These are long-term projects and not really dependent on one single administration in all likelihood. But we certainly have greater uncertainty right now about federal commitments. We have other potential revenue sources at the state level and at the regional level. All those things, almost invariably, when these projects are not fully funded as the design gets there, and they pull together this pot, and that's how they get funded. And it's makes people uneasy because you're not going in with the dollars that you think you need to complete it. But that's how big mega projects typically get funded. So we've got to lay all that context out on the table before we get to be able to talk about what we really want to talk about with them. But that's a lot of groundwork to share with everybody before we can have a meaningful conversation. And I wish there was a way to get around it, but I don't think there is. And that just adds to the communication challenge that you face. Okay, I guess the other critical thing for me is when we have our timelines, we have a couple of important decision points and decisions to make. One is, when do we make a decision to potentially mothball Churchill? Because it isn't fundable on the horizon, and we would be prioritizing Meadow and Charleston. But one of the reasons we had the funding, federal funding to go forward with the design, and one of the reasons was to see, can we solve the problems that are there on property impacts? And so we want to take it far enough that we had something that we could put on the shelf if we were not going to go forward with constructing it, but we had solved those problems. So how far along in this process at Churchill do we need to get in order to feel like we have answers to that question?
So our intent is our first attempt would be at 15% levels to get that answers, and then have that decisions made to proceed with 35%. Our intent is that at 35% and in completion of the environmental documentation, then the decision would be to prioritize Meadow and Charleston in the next few.
So you think at the
subsequent phases.
15%, we'd have that sense? I mean, we've got the refined concepts to the rail committee and council, and the council will decide which alternatives to go to 15%. That would be decision point 1 in Q3.
So there will be some level of information at that point, and then subsequent to that decision, if the council feels that there is desire to approach with both alternatives for Meadow Charleston, then we would have it at the decision point 2.
Okay.
And we certainly will have to complete this entire phase for Meadow, Charleston, and Churchill for PE and environmental phase because of the funding agreement that we have in place.
And then similarly on Meadow Charleston, one of the big impacts would be whether we can minimize property impacts there. And that would go into a decision of whether we go with the underpass that has a lot of advantages, but some disadvantages, including property impacts, or the hybrid. And so do you think it's at the 15% that we would be ready to make that decision on whether we go forward with one or both to take to 35? What are those decision points?
That 15% decision point 2 would be a point where we would have that information. But if the council feels, actually at that point is the one where we will like to move forward only with one.
Okay. And then I think this is my last question. We have T.Y. Lin, a very famous company, that is going to be working on these designs. But they're working within the design technical standards that Caltrain currently has in place. What's the process to finish that negotiation? Are they going to negotiate with Caltrain on our behalf? How do we resolve these differences in Caltrain's assertions of what they need versus what we said we think there are needs and prefer to have that they have, but they were kind of putting them all in the need standpoint. So where does that negotiation happen? That was where we were in the middle of when we went to take advantage of this funding for design.
So during the first decision point, there will be some articulation of those assumptions. And at that point, we would have some design exceptions that we would be requesting to Caltrain if needed. In the event there is not a propagation of those design exceptions, the rail committee would have the option, will be reviewing those and would have further directions and to the staff in the next subsequent phase of the development. Jill, if you'd like to add anything.
And that's that basis of design report that we talked about in the GEC scope. So they'll be developing that from the start to inform that 15%.
And I'm just wondering whether there are check-ins on that kind of negotiation to make sure that we don't have TY Lin proceeding with a lot of expense on a design that we're going to say, no, if Caltrain won't give ground on that, we don't want to proceed there, or we want to engage with a battle with Caltrain on trying to negotiate changes in the design standards before they spend millions of dollars. So I'm trying to understand that what is the right sequencing to resolve those outstanding issues with Caltrain?
I believe at decision point one, with the basis of design, there will be those assumptions outlined, and the rail committee would have an option that be able to review those assumptions, and we could have that further discussions before they proceed with the heavier lift on the 15% design.
Okay, because a lot of that really is negotiable with Caltrain, but they won't negotiate unless we really say these are things that we insist on negotiating on. I say that as a Caltrain board member.
Correct. And we'll have to be very mindful and watchful of what their basis of assumptions are. Yes.
Okay. All right. We all good?
If you're good, we're good.
No, I don't know if I'm good, but good as I'm gonna get. All right.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
input on the outreach plan. I really appreciate it. And
Good.
we'll include that in our revised draft.
Thanks. Okay. Now we get to go on to our study session, which is
For 10 minutes.
Thank you, Jim.
yeah. Okay. Which is the South Palo Alto Bike Ped connectivity to provide feedback on initial crossing opportunity locations and draft design priorities and evaluation criteria.
Good evening, Chair Ripan Bhatia, Interim Chief Transportation Official. I have Charlie Cole as Sylvia Starlek from our transportation planning team working on the South Palo Alto Bike Ped connectivity project, and I'll hand it off to Charlie.
Great. Thank you. Charlie Cole, Senior Transportation Planner with the Office of Transportation. We're also joined by Amanda Leahy from Kittleson and Associates on the Zoom meeting. So if they have any questions, we can bring her in at the end to help answer those. Next slide, please. So just an overview of what to expect this evening. The staff report provided to you provides an overview of the project and update on work completed to date. We've recommended the Rail Committee review the existing conditions report and the draft goals and design priorities memorandum, and we're requesting feedback from the Rail Committee on the initial crossing opportunity locations and draft design priorities and evaluation criteria. Quickly, here's our agenda for this evening. I'll provide an overview of the project since this is the first time you're hearing about it through the Rail Committee. We'll talk about project goals and objectives. We'll review work completed to date and next steps. I'll talk briefly about a couple of sections in the existing conditions report that staff believes are important for the Rail Committee and the general public to understand. Then I'll quickly cover the crossing opportunity locations and the design priorities and evaluation criteria before we get into discussion. So project objective. So the purpose of this project is to improve bicycle and pedestrian access across the rail corridor, focusing in the southern portion of the city. To accomplish this, the goal of the project will be to identify locally preferred locations and design concepts for 2 new grade-separated bicycle and pedestrian crossings of the Caltrain corridor. Each of the 2 preferred concepts will be developed into 15% designs and ultimately packaged into a final plan. The final plan will also include an implementation plan and funding strategy for next steps. The project team will seek to secure funding for final design and construction. And I just want to emphasize that this is considered the conceptual planning phase of the overall project. And it's just one of the first steps in this process. So here's our project study area. It's shown on screen and identified as a dashed blue line bounded by Oregon Expressway, Middlefield Road, San Antonio Road, and El Camino Real. We received some good questions and feedback to date regarding how the project team came up with the study area, so I thought I'd just spend a moment talking about that. So when we first kicked off the project, we defined a project study area to really narrow in on certain data to be collected as part of the existing conditions report, and we really wanted to focus on the areas closest to the rail corridor. However, the existing conditions report, as you've all read it, presents data in all of South Palo Alto in some cases, recognizing that a future crossing or future crossings will have citywide effects on how people choose to travel. But the focus for this project will be at the future crossings on the rail corridor south of Oregon Expressway, as well as what bicycle and pedestrian improvements will be needed to get to and from those future crossings. So just quickly wanted to highlight the significance of this project. Several citywide plans and studies, including the one shown on your screen, have identified the need for additional grade-separated bicycle and pedestrian crossings, particularly in the southern portion of the city. So this project is implementing the recommendations of previous plans and studies to address mobility gaps and barriers to walking and biking in support of the city's mobility and sustainability goals. So here's our project timeline and when the community can expect to share input throughout this process. It's a step-by-step approach. As shown, we have reviewed existing conditions and are currently in phase 1 of community engagement, where we're working with the community to establish design priorities for the crossing alternatives analysis. Next, the project team will develop crossing alternatives and share those with the community for feedback in phase 2. Following phase 2, there'll be some refinements of crossing alternatives, and then a public draft report will be released for review and comment in phase 3. The goal for phase 4 will be to obtain council adoption of a final report. The project team will also work to secure funding for next steps. So it's kind of what's shown there at the top in the summer of 2026, applying for grant funding, recognizing that next steps would include environmental review, final design, and construction. I also wanted to note that there will be multiple council discussions throughout the project at each phase of engagement, particularly during phase 2, where we'll be asking the community to select two locally preferred crossings to move forward with as we prepare the draft and final reports. Next slide, please. So I'll cover this quickly, but happy to circle back if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what we're doing for community engagement and particularly for phase 1 of community engagement. But on your screen includes a list of all the activities illustrating how we're engaging with the community through a variety of different mediums. Also just wanted to note that we do still have an online survey that's live through this Thursday, May 22nd. And to date, we've received almost 700 responses on this survey. Thank you. So the review of existing conditions. So as I mentioned, that existing conditions report is available online and included in your agenda packet this evening. It includes the sections that are shown on your screen, really recognizing that no data source is perfect or perfectly represents the real world. We've looked at a variety of different data sources to capture what we believe to be a reasonable representation of the existing conditions. And this information presented in this report, we anticipate combining with the additional data that we gather through community input during phase 1 and future phases. Key findings from the existing conditions report are included in your staff report. The report concludes, or one of the conclusions made in the report is a list of the potential crossing opportunity locations, which we'll talk about more here in just a minute. And those are developed based on the review of existing conditions as well as other feasibility considerations. On the next 2 slides, I will talk a little bit more about the bicycle and pedestrian accessibility analysis and big data analysis. Again, just recognizing that the information presented in those sections in particular are somewhat technical, but I thought it was important for the committee and the general public to understand those a bit better. So starting on packet page 99 is the bicycle and pedestrian accessibility section in the existing conditions report. So what is this? This is a network accessibility analysis calculated using GIS or a geographic information system to estimate travel times from existing rail crossings along the existing street transportation network. So this is not a straight line analysis. It's actually on the travel network itself. Travel times are shown in 5, 10, and 15-minute increments using different colors. And the analysis tells a story of how long it takes to walk or bike from the existing crossings, illustrating areas with limited east-west connectivity. So with any calculation, there are inputs. I just wanted to highlight the inputs for these calculations so you understand those a bit better. So we've only included the crossings at California Avenue, the underpass, Meadow Drive, Charleston Road, and the San Antonio Caltrain Station bike ped underpass in this analysis. We used a walking speed of 3 miles an hour. This is considered on the lower end of walking speeds and typically used for calculating walk times at signalized intersections. We also used a bike speed of 10 miles an hour, also considered on the lower end to account for stops at intersections. And we assumed that bicyclists will not travel on high-stress streets or cross high-stress intersections. And so this builds off of the level of traffic stress analysis that was included earlier in the existing conditions report that starts on packet page 78. And again, this is considered a conservative assumption since many cyclists will actually feel comfortable to cross higher stress intersections if there's a signal there and they're provided with a phase to do so. Next slide, please. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about the big data analysis and the work that was done for this section. So this starts on packet page 103, again in the existing conditions report. And this presents an analysis of travel patterns, including origins and destinations, which is what's shown on your screen, as well as information on trip length, trip purpose, travel mode. And this is all provided through a big data provider called Replica. Replica uses a blend of GPS, location data, land use data, census, economic activity data, and other data sources to calculate travel patterns. A few clarifications that I think are important to underline and help you kind of understand this information. One, we used data from spring of 2024. So this representing the average weekday and weekend day, including all trip purposes. So it's not just commute trips. Some other sections in the existing conditions report focuses on just commute trips. This is all trip purposes. The big data analysis presents results in terms of person trips, which is different from other terms used throughout the existing conditions report, such as vehicle trips. So just to give you an example, 2 people in 1 car is considered 2 person trips, and it's also considered 1 vehicle trip. So nuance there, but again, I think it's important to recognize that. And trips we typically refer to as one way. So going from home to work, that's 1 trip. Going back from work to home, that's another trip. So similar to what I did on the last slide, what were our assumptions? How did we filter the big data? And what does the data here really represent? So it's, I think there's 2 key things to note here. One is that they are one-way trips that are less than 5 miles in length, that cross, and 2, that cross the rail corridor at California Avenue, Oregon, Page Mill, Meadow, Charleston, San Antonio, and at the San Antonio Bike Ped Underpass. So it's all the crossings, trips that are crossing the rail corridor within or near our study area that are less than 5 miles in length. So with that, next slide. Okay, so here are the potential crossing locations. As I mentioned, were included in the existing conditions report. We're looking for your feedback this evening on where you think the city should prioritize new bicycle and pedestrian crossings. So what feedback do you have on the potential crossing locations that we've identified? Which locations should be prioritized or eliminated? And we'd really want to know some of your reasons for why. And of course, are there any locations that we've missed? So just to kind of quickly go through these and define them a bit better, we've identified 6 locations, and we've labeled them A through F. Location A is generally near the Colorado Avenue and Page Mill Road location within the study area. Location B is a larger area, generally bound by El Dorado Avenue and Loma Verde Avenue. Location C is near Barron Creek and El Verano Avenue. Location D is between Meadow Drive and Charleston, with a potential connection between Lindero Drive and Robles Park at Park Boulevard. Location E is near Adobe Creek, and this could include potential connections with Eli Place and Green Meadow Way. And then location F is at San Antonio Road interchange or near the San Antonio Road interchange. And so this could include a future crossing at the what's called San Antonio Avenue, which is just parallel and adjacent to San Antonio Road that connects to Alma. It could also include modifications to the San Antonio Road overpass and the interchange. So with that, next slide, please. So these are the draft design priorities. I won't go through them in detail. They were provided in the agenda packet, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. So these were identified based on the project needs, goals, and benefits that have been documented in several plans and studies previously prepared by the city. So you can think of these as some of the overarching goals for this project. So we're looking for your feedback on the draft design priorities. Which of these priorities are most important, least important? Do these definitions need to change, and why? Next slide, please. So building off of the draft design priorities, you can see on your far left, you have the same draft design priorities listed that were on the previous screen. Building off of those, we've prepared a list of draft evaluation criteria. And so we've listed the evaluation criteria, and then we've provided a description of how we intend to measure. And so these are the metrics, so to speak, of how we intend, or the proposed metrics for how we intend to evaluate alternatives going forward during phase 2 of the project. And so we'd be looking for your feedback on the draft design and evaluation criteria. And so with that, I just have one more slide. It's just a quick summary, a few of the questions that I included in my presentation just to help guide the discussion, but I look forward to receiving your feedback. Thanks.
Thank you. Why don't we see if we have any members of the public who want to speak on this, and we may need to, I think we will need to limit the amount of time they speak, given that we're already over our meeting deadline.
Did you want to do 2 minutes or?
Well, how many speakers?
We have two speakers.
Yeah, let's go 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Our first speaker is Roland.
Thank you, Chair Burt. So very briefly, initially I had no plan on speaking to this because I think it's a little bit premature. But having looked at the last slide, I want to give you a heads up that we're really going to have to start rethinking of how we go about doing this, bearing in mind the recent experience of what happened in Menlo Park, which was a clear indication that whatever methodology was being used is not the appropriate one, because doubling the number of tracks should not be resulting in a doubling of the cost of the project. So moving forward, I will be sharing information of, once again, how this is done in Japan, not just in Japan, actually, also Malaysia, in Malaysia as well. And that in turn profoundly impacts how you go about designing this in the first place. I also want to give you a heads up that you can achieve significant economies of scale if you can get all the cities up and down the alignment of what the actual size of the pedestrian underpass are going to be. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Our next speaker is John M.
Hello. I just have one comment. I think it's very worthwhile to have the bicycle underpasses. The question of where is an important one. Personal to me, again, because of where I live. And when I received the invitation by mail from the city about questioning my response, whether I would support a bicycle tunnel and where to put it. there was a presumption that some project is going to be done. But there was no question, which I thought would be worth asking, is asking other residents, would you favor the project if you knew it harmed your neighbor or your neighbor's property? And that presumption was, that question was not asked. Do you follow what I'm asking here? That's what I'd like to see happen, perhaps in the future, because a lot of the Sturm und Drang around grade separation, all these other things, people are in favor of it as a concept. But if you look at your neighbor and you go, you know what, we're taking your parking spaces and we're taking your driveway because we want to drive our bikes and make our kids safer, that's a different conversation than a conceptual one. So I would ask about that values question being considered in future surveys. That's my comment. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Melinda M.
The deadly duo here. As a biker myself, you saw on the map, one of the crossings was named our street that we live on, Lindero Drive. I think it's really important to have other bike crossings because I commuted to Stanford for a long time through that California Avenue tunnel. So having something, and I lived in Midtown, so something in between would be good, which seems like that's going to be the recommendation. But going back to the earlier conversation, really looking at the stakeholders, several people's points were right on target about looking at people who think, gee, it would be nice to have an underpass at Meadow because I go there, but there's a way to get across the tracks there, but there's other places to go. And I think you're addressing that and, really separating out just people who generally think, oh, it would be nice, people who would be harmed from whatever the plan is, and really focusing on the people that are impacted the most from any of these decisions. So yay for the bikes getting across the train tracks at another location.
Through the chair, that concludes
Not at our house.
public comment on this item.
Okay, thanks. Who would like to go first? Julie?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Charlie. I noted that Coverly was mentioned and San Antonio Road were both mentioned whenever something was being addressed near them. It was like in the environment is Coverly, in the environment is San Antonio Road. And, it's interesting how the projects in various committees and council work are all starting to come together. So I would love for the next iteration to feel even more tightly aligned with the progress we're making, to mention the San Antonio area plan, because that's going to change a whole lot of things. And we've got to be really excited and on top of what the bikeways through there are going to be. So when we get a report that doesn't seem to be quite as up to speed on the fact that that's happening, or what our hoped for plans with Coverly are as an actual destination, well beyond the destination it currently is. So I just encourage you to be as aligned with the other major things that are happening that this will tie into. I find similarly on area D between Meadow and Charleston, you reference that this would be a commuting point for JLS people. Gunn was not on the list. Gunn has definitely got more people than JLS, and they'll be going the other direction, but using that same tunnel. So I would reference that, and I see that as a benefit for that area, although I don't have to live right there as the public commenters do. And last, I kind of wondered about the extent to which, I guess another integration with potential with other city action example would be this notion of vision zero and safe systems approach. I don't think I saw that referenced in the report. If I did, I might have missed it, but it feels like that's something we've been talking about. I think it gets confusing. Like, is it vision zero? Is it safe systems? Is it a bike and ped plan? Is it a master plan? And just anything we can do to be kind of cross-referencing the other things, I think it'll tighten the web of understanding and the sense of coherence that all of this goes together. And lastly, to that point, there were some images in here that were figure 6 and 8 referenced imagery of a viaduct as a grade separation solution and a trench as a grade separation solution. And those are not on the table right now. And I worry that anyone who sees this report isn't in favor of those solutions will be like, yay, they brought back the trench and the viaduct. And people who are against those solutions will be up in arms because they thought those solutions were off the table. So I just urge for those to come out of the next version of this report. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Well, I was just going to say, given the time and the first item, unfortunately, went really long. So I'm just wondering if it would make more sense for you to prioritize and say, here are 3 good ones, or here's how we rank them, and as a way to, kind of focus us, because you've been in this in massive detail. It's just a suggestion given the hour.
Yeah, to that point, I think staff's marching down the path of up to 8 alternatives that are part of the evaluation. So just want to make sure it's the right 8. And perhaps really just with the benefit of the committee as a part of the overall process. But again, it's a process, so it doesn't end tonight.
I was going to ask for the draft evaluation criteria. So we have accessibility, and that talks about the walk and bike access, but I don't see kind of a good measurement for how new crossings open up new geographies. And so I don't know if that's like an isochrome map that shows the travel sheds. Is it a measure in the increased number of square miles that you're able to access? Is it network connectivity and looking at how many nodes it touches? Is it changes in trip distances? Like, how do we represent that a little bit better? Or catchment areas? And then another thing that might be helpful is to kind of Julie's point, to increase the web of understanding, is having an overlay of where housing is going to be added in the city and upzoned, because that helps other people who are like, oh, I forgot, I don't live near San Antonio, I forgot that we're doing stuff that would change my answer. I think that's a big part of this. And my opinion doesn't really matter, but I think B and F, because they have the widest physical location to kind of pick an alternative, might offer some of the best opportunities. Because there's other ones that are harder, like the one that comes up in Robles Park means either acquiring property or digging under Alma and properties to get to Robles Park. And so that's probably a lot more complicated than something along the creek area. So that's my feedback.
Thanks. So first, I'm excited that we're moving forward on this because I've really been advocating that we should, we've been needing this for a long time. I saw that you went in kind of back in the chronology, but I believe the first identification of the need and the location in the vicinity of Matadero was in like 07 or so. And I'm trying to remember the report on that. I was on the planning commission at the time, and I have this recollection. But that location of B has been identified for a long while, pushing 2 decades, as a priority location, in part, for some of what's in the report. It has the greatest distance of no grade crossing in the community. And so I didn't quite see that metric in the criteria. There are things that maybe implied that, but how far in distance and time, which it's probably more important time even than distance, to get to a place that you can cross the tracks. And for that matter, cross Alma safely, because right now we have not only that great distance, but there's no safe crossings of Alma either. And the two go hand in hand, of course, but because got to get across the tracks if you cross Alma. So this other issue that Nadia raised of the new geographies, that basically not only who would it serve today, but what trips would it open up? who would move from biking or driving to biking as a result of this. And one of the things about the one at B is that it opens up all of Stanford Research Park to all of Midtown. So all those people who live in Midtown and work in the research park. And are you aware that Stanford Research Park had done a heat map on where all their workers live? Yeah, so they did that looking at transit passes along El Camino, and they were surprised by that. But they'd be glad to supply that, and they'd be good partners. They have a very strong TMA program, and we've had a lot of discussions with them about specifically how that location B in the vicinity of Matadero would open up the possibility of people going to the Stanford Research Park, not only by bike, but by electric bike. And as you go uphill there, that really changes potential commute patterns, especially when we're in a heavier congestion period where people are just backed up trying to get those 2 miles or a mile and a half to their job on a 20-minute commute. And then also there was a reference to high schools. I think that it would be really valuable to put the high school map on the map so that we see where that is and where Gunn High School is a demarcation, because B is probably right close to that border between the two, but across, as you cross El Camino, it clearly is in that gun district, or you really across the tracks of the gun district. And currently, we have a poor route of sharrows on a narrow Matadero, but we have this prospect of an off-road Class 1 path in between the research park and the back fences of Chamales that would hook all the way up to the ballpark path, going into the research park, going to Gunn High School. Really glad you're using the replica data. Are they able to provide any prospective modeling, or is it all just existing data and retrospective?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's actually something that we're planning to dig into with the consultant team actually next week or in the next couple of weeks. It does use existing data, but my understanding is that it is a model. So there is some ability to do some forecasting as you make changes to things like the transportation network. Amanda, if you're on the phone and want to expand on my response or clarify anything that I said, please feel free to do so.
Yes, thanks, Charlie, and hello, everyone. Amanda Leahy with Kittleson. So the replica model data that we get is, like Charlie said, based on existing conditions. We won't get forecast volumes from them, but we are planning on taking an approach that uses VTA model data that's been updated with the housing element information and also informed by the area plans to understand population and land use change and look at future growth and what ridership, walking and biking would look like in a future year.
Okay, and so that will tie into, we have more than 1,000 new housing units that are planned on El Camino in that vicinity. It's part of why we endorsed protected bike lanes on El Camino. But what we've had in the community a shortage of is, well, we call them north-south routes. We know they aren't truly north-south, but we've got, everything from Ballpark Path to Park Boulevard, now El Camino, Bryant, all the way out to Lewis and Greer and Ross. But it's the east-west that is our problem. And so where will it be most advantageous in feeding that whole network, our new housing, our existing jobs, and otherwise? Let's see. Well, one, I see that you've got maximize ease of construction. And I assume that I'm not, I guess maybe it's under extended right-of-way impacts, but there are some locations where, most of our locations, there are construction constraints, just like the grade separations. One of the things about the Matadero location B is that on the east side, we have a very wide planting strip that potentially would allow a ramp running, we'll call it north-south. And on the west side, we have some surplus Caltrain, a spur line that had been there, and there's some land that's vacant, and other land that could be good landing sites there. And so that's another reason why between that being the biggest gap in the community and one of the most important prospective east-west corridors, which we had looked at, we had looking at whether we could have a corridor in the creek right away. We did a pop-up 10 years ago and it didn't work. And then we looked at on Loma Verde, and that had problems, but a bike boulevard with limited vehicular access around in the vicinity of El Carmelo could really be a great continuity, actually all the way out to the bay, not a direct single line, but having that really strong corridor east-west, and this being the backbone of it, I think is, to me, really both exciting and I think that eventually we may want to look at a second crossing, but that location has been the preferred one for a long time for the same set of reasons, although it's more so today. So I appreciate the process we're going through. Are we going to take 2 years to get to where we already were at the beginning is kind of something I'm struggling with. So the sooner we get to that decision, and the other advantage too of a number of the locations is how it relieves the congestion at existing grade crossings, or gives a relief valve for when we are actually doing construction of a vehicular crossing. And don't know if we have that in the criteria, but if we don't, I think that's an important consideration as well. So that's all my feedback, and looking forward to this moving forward as soon as possible. I saw that on the funding, wanting to pursue the grant funding. What we've been told time and again is that there's a lot more funding available for the active transportation projects than the vehicular ones, and at a whole different range of funding levels. And so the sooner we narrow things down and can start applying, the better. Now, not to mention that I wouldn't want us to get stuck if we don't have grants at a certain time. We have the prospect of being able to tap into Measure B grade separation dollars. We don't want to squander them for this, but we could use them to keep the ball rolling. And I believe it would not require a change in VTA criteria for using those dollars. But if it did, I've already had discussions at VTA on that this is the sort of thing we want to make sure we're supporting. So I think philosophically they're on board as well, but their answer has been, but don't use up your Measure B grade separation dollars for this if you can get it from other buckets. I agree with that. But on the other hand, I don't want the project to come to a halt because we haven't got that first funding. So we'll face that when we get there. All right. We all good? Thank you very much. And
good presentation.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, very good. Ripon, do you have for next meeting and any tentative agendas?
We plan to bring in a quiet zone update, review for the quiet zone,
Great.
as well as the review of the 15%, the refined concept plans.
Great. And when we have the quiet zone, will we have kind of the timeline and in a way that we can really look at how can we tighten the timeline? That's a real important goal. We're all shocked by the projection on how long it will take, and we want to see if there are ways to reduce that.
So we'll look into it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.